Hey everyone, my name is Dave and welcome to the NTDRacing Speed Shop. You can see behind me this big contraption that we made in the last video to get accurate dimensions off of this RZR 200 EFI. And this is a technique that you could really use on any kind of side-by-side if you're trying to build your own roll cage. But today what we're doing is we're taking those accurate dimensions and we're going to go take them over to the bendtech software. We're going to generate some pick points. We're going to design an entire roll cage and prepare that to cut on the Dragon A250. During this video, I'm going to say a bunch of times, check the description below for other information, maybe videos I've made in the past, so you can find that stuff there. To get started, we're going to throw my little boy into the seat. We're going to go ahead and confirm the dimensions that we want as far as vertical height and make sure that while he is in a seated position in the vehicle, that his helmet will always be greater than 3 inches from any tube inside the roll cage. From there, we'll go ahead and start putting all those dimensions in the bendtech. We'll do a quick calibration on our tube bender and we'll flesh out this roll cage. Let's go ahead and get to it. Today is all about the bendtech software, and here's my experience with the software. This is my first real big project I did, and this is our Jeep J10. And the unique thing about this is I designed it in bendtech and I cut every single one of these tubes out. It was like 115 tubes by hand, and I show you how I did that. There's a link in the description below for some of the videos on how I made Honcho or Jeep J10. We went from there and I kind of met the folks at bendtech and they invited us to come out to cut our next truck here, which is Lefty. So again, I have like 4 videos that show you exactly how I do all the geometries for the suspension and everything, and how I prepare this vehicle here and build this whole chassis in the bendtech software and then take it to their facility in Osceola, Wisconsin, and I cut out 120 of these tubes, whereas Honcho took about 3 or 4 months to cut all these tubes out. When I went to the bendtech facility, it took us about 3 hours on the Dragon A400, an amazing machine. And we'll get to the hardware later on. But today what we're doing is we're going to go ahead, and I've already been kind of tinkering with what we're going to build. We're going to build this in the software. So where do you get the bendtech software? If you go to, let me see here, bendtech.com, bend-tech.com, and you click on their software, it comes up with their different options for software. And it can be anything from like $69 where you can do 2-dimensional parts. What we're doing today is probably in this $295 region where we're making chassis and roll cages, or you can go all the way up to like a pro version of this thing. But I think this will get you there for what we're doing right now. And you will find, and I say this all the time, this costs a lot less than a tube notcher. And after using this for a while, you'll like wonder, why did I ever think about buying a tube notcher? bendtech, I think, is the way to go, and just wait until we get to the machines. Those are going to be awesome. But right now we're talking about the software, and this is what we're trying to build, is something like this, but just a couple different modifications to the plan, which is from the Unlimited Off-Road Racing. And I talked about that when we pulled all of the dimensions off of the side-by-side in the last video I just did. Again, link for that also in the description below. Let's go ahead and get to building this. So I'm going to use this as a reference since I kind of tinkered with this a few times, and then I can kind of go back to this so we don't get lost as far as like what I'm making. So we're going to go over here, we're going to say File New and make a new assembly, and we're going to start with the pick points. And what we're going to do is let me get this thing kind of set up here so I can click back and forth, is this front left over here. We're going to call this, I'm going to call this a 0 point. Just about every other pick point is mostly defined off of this point. Let's start with that one. So just to make sure, it looks like we have a pick point there. I'm going to just make sure that we do, I'm going to say apply at 0, 0, 0. I'll set the reference point and say apply. So just to make sure that we actually do have a pick point there. I think we do. I just want to make sure. If you don't hit the apply button, if I don't say apply at any time today, you'll see that a pick point doesn't happen. We got to go back and redo it over again. Let's do the second pick point, which is that point to the right of it over there, the other side of the vehicle. And the measurements we got off that were 36.25 inches to the right. And I'm going to hit apply to lock that pick point in over there. And you'll see that as we're kind of doing this, you're like, man, I'm lost. This is where we are. A couple ways that you can kind of help we can help ourselves get back to being right. So I have to go over to projections over here and say left, and then now it'll project it to the left side of the vehicle, and then I hit the right mouse key and I can kind of move this thing or orient it around. I can scroll in and out to make it bigger or smaller, or I can push down that scroll wheel to move it around my page, and that's what I'll be doing all day today. So as I go back to this one over here, just to make sure that even I'm oriented correctly, I'm going to go projections. I'm going to project to the left. I'm going to hit that right mouse click, and I'm going to push it over, and then I'm going to move this thing over to the center, just so I keep myself oriented as to where I am. All right, I'm going to clear the values, and then now what we're going to do is we're going to select the next pick point, which is going to be these points down over here where all these tubes meet. Those right there, which we pulled off of the roll cage. And for those values, I've got that they go left 4.35 inches. They go towards the floor at 18.8125 inches, and then they go back 18 inches. Now, one of the gotchas over here is towards the floor, is that remember that when you are doing bendtech, is that all of your dimensions go to the center of the tube. So you got to find the center of that tube. So in this case, it went to 18 and a 1/16 of an inch, so 0.0625. I had to add in the 0.75 to get that 0.8125 dimension on there. There we go. And so I got that point on there. The other part about this whole roll cage that I found, which I really like about the RZR stuff, it really impressed me, is that from left to right, it seemed like everything was symmetrical. Like, the values here were very predictable for the values over here, the height and everything. So that being said, what I'm going to do is we're going to make the left and right symmetrical. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this other side as the reference point, and I'm going to put I must have selected the wrong one. So you got to make sure you select the correct reference point. So I'm going to select this one, the front left one. I'm going to hit apply. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to delete that one because that's not the one I wanted. I'm going to go and make sure I go back to pick points, single, and see, if you scroll over here, it still says it wants to delete that feature. So if I actually select something else and back to pick point single, now it says select a reference points. You want to make sure you don't start erasing stuff you don't want to. I'm going to select now the right side as a reference point. Now I want everything's going to be the same back into the floor. The only thing that's going to change is now it's going to be to the right. So if I come over here and select right, it takes that 4.35 value and puts it over on the right side. And now I can say apply. And then now that it makes that bottom right piece over there. So, all right, let's go back over and we're going to do now the B pillar. So I'm going to go back over. I'm going to select this as my reference point. I'm going to clear all the values out of here. And then now for the B pillar, it's going to be left 3.69 inches. We're going to the back at 40.75 inches. We're going to the floor 0.3 inches. And we'll apply that one. We're going to select the other side again. We're going to swap that 3.69 to the right side. We're going to hit apply to put that same point on the opposite side. And then now we're going to go to the very back. We're going to clear all the values. I'm going to select that front left again as my reference point. This time we're going to the right, 10.6. Did I hit a point in there? I did not. 0.625. We're going to go towards the back 56 inches, and then we're going towards the floor. Again, I added in the 0.75, which gives us 1.98 inches, and I'll hit apply. We're going to select the other side. We're going to reverse the 10.626, doesn't matter, it's close enough, to the left side and hit apply. And then now we have all of those points. And one way we can kind of QC our work is we can go and look at it from the top, and you can kind of see these all look symmetric. Here's the front left, front right. Here's those pieces next to your knees. Here's the B pillar, and here's the very back. And if I go projection to the left and kind of tilt it down like this, and I go over here, we're kind of looking in the same orientation as we are right there. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to kind of make this piece right here. And this is kind of tricky in that this thing leans two different ways. One, it leans about 7.7 degrees aft, and it leans about 5 degrees in. And that's the way that it makes it basically made up with that bung exactly. So we need to kind of make that line on there. Now what we can do is we go over here, and this is something I learned when I was years old, is that if you go up to help and you go to the trig calculator, it's going to allow you to kind of flush those numbers out. And so for this one, I know that my A value, just based on putting my little boy in the car, and I know how high I want the roll cage to be, I know I want it to be 21 inches above the face of the bung. So that's going to be 21 on that side. Now this angle that we were measuring happens to be on the opposite side of the A. So we got the 90 degrees. It's going to be this B value over here. And it's 7.7 degrees from vertical, which means that the other side is got to be 82.3 degrees. Basically, it's 7.7, 90 minus 7.7. You know, in a triangle, just quick math for those of you who forgot, if it's any triangle, all the values of all the angles need to equal 180. So we have a 90 degree, we have 82, and then we got 7.7. All those equal add up to 180 degrees. But anyway, so the opposite of A is 21. The opposite of the B is 21. But that it also tells us that basically what this thing has to do is that this B distance right here, the amount that it's going to slope back, is going to be 2.83 degrees. And likewise, since it also leans in, there's 85 degrees. So it leans in 5 degrees, subtract from 90, you get 85. And so it leans in 1.83 inches. If I said degrees before, I meant inches. So when I go in here now, I can close this out and create this pick point off of this B pillar point. So I'm going to select my reference right here. I'm going to clear all the values. And then now I know I want to go up 21 inches. I need to go back 2.83 inches, and I need to go to the right, in this case, 1.83 inches. And then likewise on the opposite side, I select this other one over here as my reference. Now the only thing that flips over the other side, because remember it's symmetric, is is just the left or right, and now I hit apply. And now with that, we're almost ready to make that B pillar. We just got to do one more thing before we make what I call the B pillar there, is that these bungs, I measured to the face over here. I measured these to the face of the bungs that were on the vehicle, but the tube actually sleeves inside the bung by about 0.3 inches. So I got to go back over here and account for that. And we're going to use a different trick for that. And you see it, I'm kind of over here. I'm like, dude, I can't make heads or tails of these dots. I'm going to go back to projection left. I'm going to scroll out a little bit. I'm going to rotate it over here and go, okay, front, there's the B pillar. Now I'm back oriented to where I was. It kind of gets you back in, to something you understand. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to use these two dots to make a line. We're going to make a pick point off of a line. We're going to say select a reference. We're going to select this one and this one. And now what I want is that the depth that tube will sleeve into the bung is 0.3 inches. But since we're going to be off the tube, I'm going to put negative 0.3 inches. And you'll see it's going to put a point in line there below the original pick point where I took, because that's how far in the tube is going to sleeve. And I'm going to apply that. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to go set reference, select that one and that one. There's my 0.3 inches. It put it there for me. I'm going to hit apply. And then now I've got all those points right there. And now we can go ahead, and just so we make ourselves feel good, we can go ahead and make this B pillar. But before we do that, we must calibrate the die, the tube bender, and the tubes that we're using. This is absolutely critical before you make any bend, or at least represent any bend on bendtech, because if you don't do that and you go and you cut all these tubes out, when you put them together, you might be off by 1/4 of an inch, and that's going to be miserable to try to fix that with a welder or just trash all that tube, because tubing is super expensive. So to do that, we need to go over to tools in our die library. And I've already done it, but let me show you how you do it. We're going to go to add new. We're going to go to on the die library, add new, and then we're going to select the wizard. And the wizard's going to run through. I'm going to go through it kind of quickly. I have a JD squared tube bender, and basically it asks you what the radius, the centerline radius of your die is. In my case, it's 4.5 inches for a 1.5 inch tube. And for the race regulations, for everyone I've seen, the radius of the die has to be at least 3 times greater than the diameter of the tube. So 1.5 inch diameter, I have a 4.5 inch radius tube. That's just right at the limit. It should, it could be 5, but it couldn't be 3.5. Just to make sure that you're not basically bending the tube too much. It's going to ask us to cut it, and I cut that tube that we're going to show you. I'm going to bend here in a second at 21.5 degrees, and I marked it at 3.5 degrees. Now let's go ahead and run this thing through the tube bender and see how it does. All right, now that we have bent it and we put it on my table and measured everything up, and I was within about 1 degree of 90 degrees, and what I got was 9.875 inches for that first measurement, and then 16.281, or is basically 16 and 9/30 seconds. I try to get as close as I possibly could. And then it gives me all of these values, which will make the new tube. Now, I've already done that, like I said, and that's this tube right here, the calibrated 4.5 inch die, 1.1 inch wall, and that tube is already in there. And so what I'll do is now we need to select the right size tube that we're going to be using. We need to select the right size die that we're going to be using. And then now we can go ahead and make straight tubes, or we can make bend tubes. So we're going to make a bend tube. So we're going to make a bend. It's going to have 2 bends in it. I'm going to say okay, and then now we need to start from right where the tube starts inside the bung. We want to make sure we click the right point. It's going to go there, and it's going to terminate at the other point there. It's going to be called part 1. You can change the name if you want, and then I'm going to say okay, and there is my tube. And then you kind of, if you want to, you can select main, and it's going to show you what the tube's actually going to look like. And right now we finally got our first tube on here. So that makes me feel good. Anyway, let's go ahead and continue on with the next one. Let's look at what we're doing. So the next one is we're going to do this tube right here. And you see I got this little funky bend right here. And let's go ahead and work through how we're going to do that. What we're going to do first is kind of like we did on this one, where we dealt with the degrees of the 7.7 and the 5 degrees down. We're doing the same thing over here. However, this time it's 28 degrees and 2. And since I've already shown you the trig calculator, I won't show you that again. I'm going to go ahead and make this line here real quick. All right, so for this one, I've already done the math. I am basically going to the left 0.66. I'm going back 10.1, and I'm going to the ceiling 19 inches. Boom. All right, I'm gonna hit apply. I'm gonna hit this one. I'm gonna switch the values over to the right. And I'm gonna hit apply. Now I got basically this line right here. And then likewise, where the tube is going to go 0.3 inches in, I need to do the same thing over here. So if I go over to line and I select this point and this point, there's the value is already in there since I had it before. I hit apply, and then I'm going to go ahead, set reference, and select that point and that point. There's the point right there. I'm going to hit apply. And now I have at least the beginning point for that tube. Now, for this thing, just the way that it's going to look, I didn't want it to go 28 degrees up and be over here because I thought it would just look kind of goofy. So I'm actually going to kick the tube further back, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that real quick over here. I'm only going to let this tube continue up 4 inches. So I'm going to go back to setting the reference for this tube. I'm going to go ahead to make another pick point. I'm going to select the reference there. And then I'm going to select this point, which is that same line that we had before, but starting from the bottom. And I'm going to go ahead and make this 4 inches. And then I'm going to hit apply. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Set the reference here to there and apply. Now I got my 2 points up there, and now I'm ready to actually, well, not just yet. For the top, what I found is that if I kick it back about 6 inches, so I'm going to go back to single pick points. I'm going to clear all these values. I'm going to select this one right here. I'm going to go back 6 inches and hit apply. I'm going to do the same thing over here and hit apply. And then now I'm kind of ready to make this what I would call, I think, the A pillar. So I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to make a bend. It's going to have 2 bends in it. I'm going to say okay. I'm going to scroll in. I'm going to select this point is the first one. That's where it can get a little confusing. I'll make sure you get the right dots. I'm going to select that one. I'm going to select that one. And then this is worth looking at over here is how this thing grabs bends. So there's 4 different things it could grab over here. It could grab the pick point, it could grab the beginning of the bend, the middle, or the end of the bend. You don't want to grab a pick point because when a tube is represented in a bend, what it is it's basically, this is a straight line that goes through the pick point. This is a straight line that goes through the pick point, but the bend does not go through the pick point. So if you pick the pick point, your tube is not going to land anywhere near this tube's not going to land anywhere near the tube you want it to. So I'm going to pick that light blue point, not the purple, which is the start or the end, the blue one, which is the middle one. And I'm going to say okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So orient this thing so I can kind of tell what I'm looking at. And again, whenever you're lost, just go back to projections. And then now you can kind of see what you're doing. I'm going to make a bend. It's going to have bent tube. It's going to have 2 bends in it. I'm going to go ahead and start over here at the bottom. It's going to go through there. It's going to go through this tube, and it's going to go until I see the blue bend, not the purples, but the blue. So there we go. Okay. And then now I can kind of look at this again on the main, and just to kind of QC the homework there again, what I can do is I can go projections from the left. And as you can see, this tube is superimposed over the other one. If you were looking at it and you saw something like this, you're like, oh, I did something wrong. It should be kind of superimposed if it is, definitely is symmetric. And in this case it is, and that looks pretty good. So I can actually put a couple other tubes in there kind of while I'm here. I can say, put in a straight tube. There's going to be a tube in between here and here, again, making it hit the blue lines. And then we got to put some other ones in here. There's actually going to be one from the center here back to the center there. You can kind of see how it snapped when it turned blue, when it snapped to the center. Now if you grab it again, it'll tell you there's something already there. It'll turn yellow since there's already a tube there. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to make these tubes, which are the tubes which I would think are along your arm. So we'll come back over, and where those tubes are going to land, we can't just have them land at the bottom down here because we have to have somewhere to weld those things to. And so I need to I'm going to basically set another point up here about 1 inch above the bottom so that the 1.5 inch tube, as it lands on there, it gives me about a 1/4 inch to weld across the bottom without hitting the bung. So again, we're going to go pick points. We're going to pick point along a line. We're going to start with this point here. We're going to go up. It can be this point or whichever point, doesn't matter, as long as it's on that same line. And I'm going to turn this into a 1 inch point. You can kind of see where that point falls in there. And I'm going to hit apply. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing over on this side. And then apply. That's that side. Now on the other side, we're going to do the same thing, but just so the geometry of the back of the roll cage is a little different. It's got to clear the back of the bed of the razor because I want to retain the bed of the razor. I think it looks pretty cool. So this is going to be 2.75 inches. So I'm going to select the reference. It's going to be there. It's going up to this point, and it's going to be 2.75 inches. I'll hit apply, and then we're going to do the same thing on this side. We're going to set reference, and then 2.75 inches, and that looks good. Now there's a straight piece that goes between this point and there. There's also a straight piece that goes in between the 1 inch pieces. Make sure I get the right thing. Yep, there we go. And that'd be straight pieces that go across the front of the roll cage. Now we need to connect these two, this one to this one. Just realize the steering wheel is right about here on the roll cage, and you can kind of see where I have it kicking out a little bit. If I do a projection from the top, I have the roll cage kind of kicking out just a little bit so that the driver has room for their arms or for their hands. So to do that, the steering wheel sits about 13 degrees aft. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the reference. I'm going to start here at this point over to this point, and then I'm setting it at 13 inches back where that steering wheel sits. And then I'm going to go ahead and apply a pick point there, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Set the reference. It's going to be from that point to that point, and then I'm going to apply that 13 inches. And then let's go over back to single pick points. I want this basically the tube to clear the steering wheel by about 3.5 inches. So it has to go another 2.5 inches out. So I'm going to clear all the values, select that as a pick point. I'm going to go left 2.5 inches and apply that. And then I'm going to select over to the right, put the pick point over here and apply that. And now we can put that tube in there. So I'm going to do a bent tube. It's going to have one bend. I'm going to say, okay. It's going to start over here from this node, which is yellow, saying that there's two tubes that kind of come to the same place. As I go over to this one, and I'm going to say, okay, and I'm doing the same thing over here. One bend tube, one bend in it. It's going to go from here to that point we just put in, and then over to that point. And I'm going to say, okay. And again, let's go ahead and QC our homework. Let's look at it from the left. Let's go design main. And you see everything kind of superimposes. This tube back here doesn't, just because it's not in plane with the other ones, but you can kind of see everything else is superimposed. It looks like it should. And then if we project it from the front, you can kind of see the same thing. It should look all symmetric. If you look at it from the top, again, it should look symmetric and nothing weird kind of going on. So I'd say we're looking pretty good. Let's go back to the left side, and then we'll continue with the part that goes next to the driver's knee. So now we're going to go ahead and put in, if I project this one from the left also, we're going to go ahead and put in these tubes right down here, which will allow us to land this part off of the A-pillar. So those points are already in there, and just like these where I had to kind of do the trig calculator, I'm doing the exact same thing for these down here. I'm going to go ahead and do a pick point. I'm going to go off of, I'm going to clear all the values. I'm going to use that as my reference. And then for these pick points, for the first one, I'm going to go to the right point 105. And then I go forward to the front. I go 2 inches. And I go towards the ceiling point 313. And apply that, and we should see, as I scroll out, we should see the two pick points there. Now if I select this one over here as the new reference point, remember I just got to switch it over to the left side and hit apply, and then now I got the same thing over there. It's a 4-inch long tube, so I want to make that a 4-inch long tube. So I'm going to come back over and hit the line, set the reference. I'm going to set this the reference, this point, and it's got to be 2 inches longer than it already is. So this would be a -2. Value for that. I'm going to hit apply, and then the same thing over here. Set the reference, that point and that point, and then hit apply, and it should put that this is make it a 4-inch long tube. And then now if I go make a straight point from there to there and there to there, and now you can kind of see I have those tubes that are represented on the vehicle already. All right, so now that we have these points, those pieces in there, we can go ahead and connect some more dots. We'll pick the straight tube. I'm going to go ahead and grab this point right here, which is the yellow dot. I'm going to go down to the tube. I'm going to grab again. Should have a beginning and an end to that bend. You can kind of see those. I'm going to make sure I grab the blue line, and then from there, I'm going to go down to the center with another one here. I'll make sure I grab the right thing. So you got to kind of scroll in to make sure you find the right things there. So it's going from there down to the center of that tube, and then from the center of that tube to this node right here. We'll do the same thing on the other side. It should be a yellow point right there. I'm going to come over here and look for a blue dot on that line right there. We're we're going to go from that, which should now be a yellow dot, down to the center of that bar right down there, and then from there all the way up to there. And then if we go back, design main, just kind of back and forth, now we can kind of see we got those tubes in there. Now we can work on this back tube back here. So now we're going to kind of work on this one right here. And the tube is already in there, so we're just going to kind of represent it so that when we make a tool path and we go to cut it, there's something to cut it up against. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to say pick points. I'm going to go line. I'm going to pick this point and this point, and it's going to put a point, since I already have the -2 in there, that one's right there. That looks good to me. And then I'm going to say reference again. I'm going to pick this point and that point. It's going to put a point on the other side right there, and I like that right there. And I'm going to put a straight tube in all the way across, which will represent what's already there. And then now we can go ahead and do another straight tube from that yellow dot down to that dot, and there down to there, and we kind of get those kickers, I think they call them. I don't know, I'm making up words. All right, and now we got the back of this thing. A couple more points that we can go ahead and put in there is if we kind of look at the way that the roll cage is designed, we got these tubes right here that create a triangle that help resist the cage from collapsing either left or right. So we can go back over here and make those. So just grabbing some straight lines going from that point to that point and there to there. And then the other one we need to put in is this one right here. Now usually what these are for, obviously it's to keep the cage from collapsing from left to right. It gives us some rigidity with that triangle. And usually I select this width based on how wide the engine is, as I kind of as I have to make the structure that allows me to pull the engine out. In this case, I don't have an engine in there because the engine's in the back of the RZR. So we just got to kind of make up some dimensions. And I found that about 12 inches from each side works pretty well. So if I go to pick points, lines, and I'm going to go ahead and set the reference. I'm going to say from that point to that point. And then I'm going to make this a 12. And apply that, and then I'm going to do the same thing, set the reference. I'm going to go from the other side, that point to that point, and I'm going to hit apply. And then now we can just go back to the straight tubes and we connect the dots on those. All right, and then I think we are looking at pretty much a roll cage that matches the one in the picture over here. We got all the parts that we kind of want, and you kind of see how that's a little bit different. I still think it's going to work pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the protection it's going to provide the driver in there, which would be my little boy. We can kind of project it from the left and see that everything looks symmetric and it's overlapping. These tubes right here and that tube right there are obviously the ones that are just slightly out of plane because they're just slightly different there. But you can kind of see that everything, if we project it from the front, looks symmetric, just to kind of give us a QC on what we did. There's no weird lines there or anything like that. So it looks good. So that is basically the end of this part 2. The next part of this is going to be, I think, the payoff, where we're going to go ahead. I'm going to show you how I order these things, and make all the cutting tool paths on here, how I'm going to do that. And then we'll nest them into the Dragon cam, and we're going to use the Dragon A250 to cut these things out and start welding this thing together. So super excited about that, but that'll be in the next episode. All right, I think that this roll cage is going to look amazing once we cut it out on the Dragon A250, and we'll get a chance to see how accurate the dimensions I took off this thing were. Like I said, there are a lot of videos in the description below. It'll show the previous video, and there are links for other videos with tasks, which I have covered in detail. With that, next week is the big payout where we're going to use the Dragon A250. We're going to flush out how we order the cuts, cut these things out, and weld together a roll cage for this RZR 200 EFI. We'll see you next week. Take care of yourself.